So we are really pleased to have Juliana Houghton from the UW Fisheries School. She is part of this wonderful paper that we heard about last year in tracking the transient orcas and kind of noting some changes that we've noted through our sighting network. And so it's really exciting to see the changes in different species over the last few years, and great to see wonderful researchers like Juliana doing papers that explain what we've been seeing, and hopefully we'll all learn why this is happening. So thank you, Juliana, for coming.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for having me. This research is about transient killer whale use of the Salish Sea, and interestingly, by their name, it seems like they might not be so transient anymore, which we'll get to. Just a little bit more background about me. I graduated from the UW School of Aquatic and Fisheries Sciences with my master's degree in 2014, and I actually did this research when I was an undergraduate at the same school at the UW, and it was finally published in a paper in Northwest Science last May. If you'd like the full name of that paper or the link, I can provide that too. First, I'm going to give a little bit of background about the whales, the killer whales that we have in our local waters. This is probably common knowledge to some of you. We have our resident killer whales and transient killer whales. Residents, they are the fish eaters. You can, why isn't this? There's a lag between what I've pushed and. Worked before, like right before. Should I is it maybe because I'm presenting from this? Should I copy it onto the desktop or something?
I would try that.
Okay.
To see what
So it's just not advancing?
Yeah, we're gonna just copy it onto the desktop.
That is bizarre.
See if it'll go faster that way. That's not mine. Is that yours?
Yes. That's our week-old puppy. Or not week-old. It's week-old to us. She's 9 weeks old now.
Why is that loading?
So was it not reading off of the flash drive?
Yeah.
Okay, so.
But now it's not even, I copied it onto the desktop and now it's still
try
not.
opening up, because you got a PowerPoint, right?
Yeah.
Just try opening PowerPoint and see if you can load it through there.
Okay. PowerPoint's not loading. Oh, there we go. It's just slow. Really slow. There we go. All right. All right. Okay, so residents are the fish eaters. You can see this is actually a whale on the left playing with a salmon. And they rely mostly on Chinook salmon, but they'll also eat a variety of other salmon species, especially in our local waters. And then there are the transient killer whales. They like to eat marine mammals, and aren't really specialists, they're generalists. They like a variety of marine mammal prey. Here is a transient killer whale taking down a sea lion. And it's interesting that these differences in prey probably have changed their behavior. So the resident killer whales, they forage in large groups, they call and use echolocation loudly while they're foraging. So they're large and not very cryptic, whereas the transient killer whales have to be more cryptic and stealthy to catch their marine mammal prey, which could hear them if they were calling while they were trying to forage. So these differences in prey have led to big differences in their behavior, and it seems to have led to a speciation event, that transients are considered by some to be a completely separate species from residents, and this is based on genetics. It seems that they haven't reproduced, transients and residents, for over 70,000 years. So they should be considered a separate species, and there's also some other differences between these two populations in our local waters. The residents look different than transients. So you can see on the left, the residents are the only ones that, compared to transients at least, that have the open saddle patch. I'm trying to get my cursor here. So the black part protruding into the gray area of the saddle patch, whereas transients don't have that. And resident fins are generally a little bit more curvy, and transients are more stocky and straight up. The names of these populations are a little bit antiquated. Residents were given that name because they were seen all of the time, and transients were thought to just come into the area and then leave and not really use the area as much. But we'll see that might not be the case anymore. So to look at the transient use of the area, first we wanted to look at their use of the area because we know that they play a heavy role in our ecosystem, that they are a top predator, eating marine mammals themselves. They themselves being a marine mammal, eating other marine mammals, not eating themselves, sorry. So they're a top predator throughout their range, and their range is quite extensive besides the Salish Sea. So here we are in the Salish Sea, but the West Coast transient population, which is where our transients are a part of, range from California through Southeast Alaska. And we want to know what role they play in this ecosystem so that we can do proper modeling to understand how the food web works and to kind of put a value on their effect on the ecosystem. For example, this has been an issue in the past because for Puget Sound, for example, they made a food web model and they just left transients out of the model because they had no data on how often transients were using the area. But we know that transients are using Puget Sound, so to be more accurate, we should be able to provide the data to show how much they're using it so that the modelers can include the transients. Understanding the use of the area is also important to inform other research efforts for conservation and management. For example, we would like to know how the animals relate to each other socially, and this can be looked at through a social network analysis. So this here is not transient killer whales. This is actually from false killer whales in Hawaii. And this is a social network analysis where each node or red dot is an animal, and the connections between the animal are, or the lines between the animals are how the lines between the dots are how the animals are connected socially. So you can see that there is like this main group in the center, kind of top right, but there's also an axillary group to the bottom left, and then another one, kind of other individuals that are on the outskirts. And it's important to understand that the animals, each animal in a population is not representative of the whole population. And if you're doing research on like satellite tagging and trying to find out where whales go, you'd probably want to look at a broad range, a broad representation of the population. So in the false killer whale example here, the white tags, those represent actual satellite tags on the individuals and how they were tracked. So you can see that only animals in that main center core group of the social network were tagged. So now that this social network was created, we can know that we should target animals in the other social groups so that we can get a better representation of the whole population. So that's just some more background on why we wanted to know what transients were doing in our local waters and how they behaved. So for my research, we looked at confirmed sightings from researchers and naturalists and whale watchers, probably several of you. Orca Network's sightings were very valuable for this study, and we only looked at confirmed identifications of the animals, and we looked at them in two periods. From 1987 to 1993 was actually from Robin Baird's PhD thesis. He's one of my co-authors, and he works with Cascadia Research Collective. And then from 2004 to 2010, that's when I was utilizing the sighting networks and sightings from other researchers to identify transient killer whales. And we also designated which matrilines the whales that were found were in. So we identified the mother of the group and named it, the T100s, for example. That's the matriline that we would track different matrilines. Just because sometimes the transients would be seen on multiple days in a row, even if they were just using the area once for a one trip to the Salish Sea, to look at how many times they actually came to the Salish Sea and then left, I just looked at occurrences, which I labeled when there was a unique encounter within 6 days. So not every day that the whales were here, but every time the whales came to use the area. And then I looked at the number of times the whales came to use the area over time, so longitudinally from the old period, 1987, to the newer period, and also by year within those periods. And I also looked at the number of occurrences across seasons, and I'll explain the different seasons that I looked at. It wasn't fall, spring, winter, and summer, but related to the ecology of the animals. And then I also looked at different areas, and that's why this map is here. I separated the areas to the San Juan Islands, the Strait of Juan de Fuca, Puget Sound, and the Gulf Islands and Strait of Georgia. And Hood Canal was separated from Puget Sound because there was an anomalous event of extended stay that you may have heard of, the transients staying in Hood Canal for a long time in 2005. I also looked at the group size of the animals, and for this, we did the minimum number of whales that could be there, so only confirmed identifications, and counting up the confirmed identification. So if someone estimated there seems to be like 10 to 15 whales here, that's not what we looked at. We looked at how, the actual individuals that were identified and counted those up. So it was a more conservative approach of group size. And then I looked at multivariate analyses. So what this means is I was able to test if there was a significant effect of season, time, and area on the occurrence of specific matrilines. So of specific individuals, are the different individuals that are coming to the area, are there some that prefer to come in different seasons, prefer to use different areas, or are they changing over time? Which ones are most commonly coming into the Salish Sea? So I used a permutational multivariate test for that. So here are some results. On the x-axis, we have the year, and first I'm showing just the older period from 1987 to 1993. And on the y-axis, we have the number of times the whales came to use the Salish Sea. And we also have it broken down by color for the different areas of the Salish Sea. You can see that the whales use the Strait of Juan de Fuca area the most. And this earlier period, there doesn't really seem to be too many trends increasing or decreasing of any specific area. Then in 2004 to 2010, you can see that the whales are using the area a lot more, not just a lot more than the previous period, but also more throughout the newer period. So from 2004 to 2010, an increasing number. And this was actually a significant effect, that there are more whales using the area in the later part of 2010, the later period, than in the earlier part of the 2004 to the 2010 period. And when looking at the areas, it seems that the Strait of Juan de Fuca is still important to these animals, but there's also an increased diversity of areas. So you can see, here, let me get to this cursor here. Puget Sound is this lighter color here, and it's increasing, especially in recent years. So they are using a greater diversity of areas in recent years as well. So overall, the animals seem to be using the Salish Sea more, and they're using more areas, more different locations within the Salish Sea over time. There is support for this increasing use of the area. It seems that if the whole population is increasing, then that might be why there's more whales coming to our local waters. So John Ford with the Canadian Department of Fisheries and Oceans, his report in 2007 showed that there is an increasing number of whales in the population of the entire West Coast transient population. So not just animals using our local waters, but the entire population. So this makes sense for why we're seeing more and more transients, and they're using our areas, our local areas, more often as well. So why are they using our area, our Salish Sea, more often? Besides just that there are more of them, it could also be because there's more prey available to them, and especially specifically in the Salish Sea. So on this graph, I have over time from 1975 to 2010, and the proportion of the prey abundance. So the highest number that the prey ever got is 100%, and then a percentage of that. So you can see that all the populations have increased over time. So this is relative abundance, it's not total numbers, but the highest numbers are all at the later time periods. So they've all been increasing over time. And we've got different populations of prey. Harbor seals in our inland waters, harbor seals in the Strait of Georgia, stellar sea lions, both in Washington and British Columbia, harbor porpoise in the lighter blue, California sea lions in orange, and elephant seals in the pink color. And this is from a variety of sources listed on the bottom right there. So the transient killer whales are utilizing all of these prey sources. They also will utilize Dahl's porpoise, which we haven't been able to find trend data on, and also gray whales occasionally, or larger whales, but those are less common, so not depicted here. Gray whales and minkies, I think. So then to show some results of how the seasonal patterns for the whales using the Salish Sea. First, this is the older time period with month on the x-axis and the percent of total occurrences on the y. So breaking down the occurrences within the time period by month. And you can see that in the older time period, 1987 to 1993, there was this strong peak in August and September, and this coincides with the harbor seal pupping and post-weaning season. So when our harbor seals are pupping in our local waters, there's a lot of harbor seals trying to learn how to swim, and that's probably easy pickings for the transient killer whale, so they like to use our local waters at that time. At least that was the most commonly used time period in the older time period. But now when looking at the newer time period, there is still this, there are some changes in seasonal patterns of occurrence. There is still this peak in the harbor seal pupping post-weaning season, but the lighter bars in 2004 and 2010 are highest there, but also high in April and May. And this coincides with the peak sea lion occurrence. So sea lions don't stay in the Salish Sea year-round. They go out into the outer coast, and their rookeries are on the outer coast, and some are much further south. So they come to our local waters just in April and May when they're following the Pacific hake, and the hake also leave and come into the Salish Sea on a seasonal pattern. So it seems that the transient killer whales are now utilizing this other prey as well. So these behavioral changes again can point back to changes in prey and how and why they are changing their behavior. When looking at group size, we have group size on the x-axis with larger groups on the right, and then how often that occurs on the y-axis. And from 1987 to 1993, the most common group size was 3 animals. So remember what I said, that these transients like to be in small cryptic groups so that they can sneak up on their prey. And they work together a little bit, but it's better to not be a big conspicuous group for them generally. And 3 was found to be the most common group size, but also the most optimum group size, like the best for catching harbor seals specifically, in Robin Baird's PhD thesis from this time period. However, in the newer time period from 2004 to 2010, there is an increasing trend for a larger group sizes. So the animals in the newer time period, they are more common. The most common group size is 4 animals, but all of these larger group sizes are also more common. You can see sometimes they're even in really, really large groups, which we didn't see in the earlier time period, with some over 20 animals large. So when you're thinking about cooperative foraging, high numbers are good for catching the prey, but they're bad for having to share that prey. So that's why 3 was the group size of 3 was the best for harbor seals, because you got to work together, but then when you split it, it was still worth it. You still got a bang for your buck. But now if you're taking down larger prey, it seems like maybe that's not the case. So to explain this increasing trend in group size over time, well, we know that optimum foraging group size can change by prey species. So maybe the group size is increasing because they're trying to forage on a variety of different prey. And this was from a paper by Marilyn Dahlheim in 2010 with observations that she had in Southeast Alaska. And you can see for Dall's porpoise, for example, and stellar sea lions, the animals were in much larger group sizes, up to 25 and 15. So these prey are larger, harder to take down, or they're faster, and you need to have a more coordinated effort. And so it seems to make sense that the optimum foraging size for these larger and more difficult to catch prey items is a larger group size of transient killer whales. Also, maybe because there are so many more prey available to them, maybe the transients don't have to forage in the optimum group size. Maybe it's okay if they have to share with a few more younger whales, for example. They have enough reserves of blubber on them, or there's enough prey to catch later on. So yes, this might relax the need to forage in that optimum group size for each prey type. And maybe because of increased prey abundance, this might increase the reproductive output of the transient killer whales. So when there's more prey available to them, they can put more energy into reproduction, and this might also lead to more calves. And obviously, and then when there's more calves, that's more animals in the group. So there are larger groups, which might be a lot of younger calves and younger whales in the groups. Also, from 2004 to 2010, we noticed just anecdotally first that there seemed to be new groups of transient killer whales coming to our local waters that weren't seen in the old period. So, and these newer matrilines, they had lots of calves, and they were really reproductively successful. So I did a poor harbor seal, his last plea. So I also did a permutational multivariate test, which basically just means instead of looking at how one thing changed because of one effect, I looked at how lots of things changed from effects. So how lots of different whales changed based on season, time, and area. So this test showed that the matrilines were different in different time periods, and the matrilines were different in different seasons, and they were different in different areas. So it's true that different matrilines overall like to use different areas of the Salish Sea. Different matrilines overall utilize the Salish Sea at different times of the year. And it's different matrilines that are coming in this most recent time period than in the earlier time periods, and even in the first part of 2004 to 2010. So that's interesting that there are differences in individuals. That's kind of explaining why we're seeing these new changes. For one of the just one way to look at specific matriline differences. In Robin Baird's PhD thesis, he identified a few matrilines as either nearshore foragers or non-nearshore foragers. And the nearshore foragers were those that focused on the harbor seal pupping areas, the haul-out sites, and then the non-nearshore foragers seem to be more commonly utilizing other prey resources. And so just in case anybody wants to know which specific families he had identified as such in 1987 to 1993, the non-nearshore foragers were the T21, T13, and T2 families, and the nearshore were the T41, T10, and T32 families. And those 6 families were still seen in the 2004 to 2010 time period, so I was able to compare how those specific individuals changed their behavior from the older time period to the newer time period. So you can see on the graph here we have the season or the month on the x-axis, and then how often the animals occurred on the y-axis. And in the older time period, 1987 to 1993, the nearshore foragers were very common in that August to September time period season, so that harbor seal pupping post-weaning season, whereas the non-nearshore foragers were kind of more common throughout. And then in the 2004 to 2010 time period, the nearshore foragers still mostly only came in that August to September season, and you can see that the non-nearshore foragers, we don't call them offshore because then that would be in a whole different ecotype. So non-nearshore killer whales are more common than they were before, and they're utilizing a variety of the different months, and they have the peak for the April to May. So it seems that these different individuals, changes in the matrilines patterns are why we are seeing these overall changes. So the increase in April and May might be a lot of non-nearshore foragers coming to use our area. So not harbor seal specialists, but more of the generalist transient killer whales. So to sum up, we seem to have an increased number of prey available to the transients. So there's more harbor seals, sea lions, porpoise. They're all increasing in our local waters. And we think that this increase, the marine mammal prey increase, is because we are no longer harassing them. We have, ever since the 1972 Marine Mammal Protection Act, we've seen an increase in all of these prey populations. So with all of the prey increasing, the transient killer whales, their population seems to be increasing as well, and locally it seems to lead to them using our local waters specifically more often, and they're changing kind of what their patterns based on what they used to do. So this increased prey and increased diversity of prey that they're utilizing has led to changes in their behavior, and now we know this paper has allowed us to have proof and show what the transients are doing for other researchers when they want to know how often killer whales are using the Puget Sound, for example, or just using the Salish Sea overall. They can quantify the effect of transients because we know that they like to eat a lot, and they do have an effect on the ecosystem, and now it can be quantified better. And findings from this study provide an interesting example of how predators are altering their spatial use and seasonal occurrence to kind of take advantage of locally and seasonally available prey. And that's interesting. I mean, you would think that predators follow prey, but there aren't that many papers in the literature that kind of illustrate that directly. So it's really interesting to see that they're taking advantage of this increased prey and to be able to show how and why that might be. With that, I'd like to thank our collaborators, especially everybody that contributed to the sighting data, and the people that helped review the paper. And I'd love to take any questions. Thanks. Yes. So the question was, did you see the same matrolines coming to the same areas over time? So yes, it seems that the matrolines overall are different, that are using the different areas and at different times, but that would mean that like one matroline has one pattern. They like to use the Strait of Juan de Fuca in August and September, but that's different than a different matroline. So I didn't look at each matroline specifically. There were a lot of them in my study, but to me that means that the matrolines have a pattern. Each matroline has its own pattern, but overall the matrolines are different. Does that make sense? So the study showed that matrolines are explaining why there are differences in seasons and over time and areas, but the matrolines themselves, each matroline itself is probably using its same pattern over time. And repeating that pattern at least for this time period. But we know that 2010 was several years ago now, and it's finally got published last year, so I'm sure you guys have noticed even more changes since then. Yes? Yeah. So the question or comment was just that there seems to, so this study ended in 2010, but there seems to be even more transients, specifically in British Columbia, and just to comment back on that, yes, I have also been keeping track of the sighting, reports, and I do agree that it seems that the transients are using the area even more and more. The group sizes are getting more, are getting larger and larger. I don't know about seasonal patterns, but they seem to be using the area in all times of the year. So I think it all makes sense that the population overall is increasing, so there's just more of them needing to find prey throughout the year in different areas. And also the prey populations are still pretty high, probably at carrying capacity, at least for harbor seals for sure. And so as there's more of the transients around, they are knowing where to find these high amounts of prey, and it does seem that they're using the area even more in more recent years, beyond 2010. Yes. So this question was about gray whales, specifically down in Olympia, and if there was any correlation between the gray whale use of our local waters and transients. and staying away. Is that what you said? Yeah. So gray whales increased, and then they increased kind of earlier than the rest of the prey populations that I showed on the graph, and they seem to be a smaller part of the diet of transient killer whales. But I think since they're such generalists, they'll utilize whatever they can. But I didn't see as much of a correlation with the gray whales. But I didn't look, in fine scale details. Yes. Yes. Yeah, so this question was about effort, and making a good point that over time there seems to be more people looking for the whales and more sighting networks and stuff. So that's a very good point, and we addressed it in our paper as well, and in looking at occurrences instead of just total sightings. That was one of the ways that we addressed it, because we wanted to count just how many times they used the area and not how many people saw them. So there was lots of sightings in the more recent time period compared to the older time period, where it was mostly one researcher's small boat surveys that was getting the sightings. So we wanted to look at occurrences, and then we also didn't make too many direct comparisons between the older time period and the newer time period, because we knew that the effort was so much greater in the newer time period. But we did make the assumption that from 2004 to 2010, sightings or effort was relatively consistent, and we did this because Giles and the Sound Watch reports indicated that whale watching, at least, was relatively consistent over that time period, and that was like a proxy for sightings. So we assumed that sighting effort was pretty consistent in the newer time period, and we did find that there was a significant increase from 2004 to 2010. So but there are caveats with sighting data, but we tried to address that in the paper as well. Any other question? Yeah. Yes. Yes. So the question was where you can find my research for a report on orcas, and I'm very sorry that I did not put the link on here. That was very foolish of me. So actually, if you Google Cascadia Research, Houghton et al., so my last name, 2015. Here, let me show you my title slide. There it is. Yeah, so it was in Northwest Science, published in May last year, and the full PDF is available for free on Cascadia Research website. Not if you go through Bio 1 to actually look it up, you have to pay, but Cascadia Research has it on there. Yes.
Possibility of specialization in natural mineral lines if they have the same patterns every year?
Yeah, so that's a really interesting question. She asked if there's a possibility of specialization of different matrilines if they have the same patterns every year. And that's super interesting, because that's obviously what happened for residents and transients, is that the different prey, led to different behaviors, and now they're different species. So it's possible that different matrilines, if they are consistently using the same pattern, and if there's harbor seal specialists, and that's different than maybe a sea lion specialist, then they would also diverge in their behaviors and then not want to interact with the ones that are doing something different. So that could lead to more differentiation. Although it seems that there's harbor seal specialists and then overall generalists that are using a variety of prey. So I don't know if that would be a big enough difference. The difference between salmon and marine mammals is huge, because salmon can't hear calls and clicks, and marine mammals can, and so they really had to change their behavior drastically for those different prey. So, yeah. Any other questions? Yeah. In the back.
Are the transients tagged or do they identify them by just their markings?
So the question is, are the transients tagged or are they identified by their markings? And they are, in this study, just identified by markings, but yeah, so I should have mentioned that the dorsal fin shape is different from between individuals, and also the saddle patch shape and coloration and scars and different markings can make it so that each individual can be told apart. It's kind of like the saddle patch and dorsal fin shape is like a fingerprint. Each individual is different, and that's how naturalists and researchers identify the whales when they're just on the boats looking for whales, and that's what was used mostly in this study. Yeah, in the back.
Do you know if there's any studies that are looking into correlation of climate change and how that has impacted maybe the travel and the changes in behaviors of orcas? Specific, I'm wondering about the warming of the oceans particularly the outer coast, which has been shown to actually be warmer than the Salish Sea, and then the toxic algae blooms consequently that are happening out there that can affect the whole variety of ecosystems down the food chain. And I'm imagining that the orcas and other animals are maybe coming in for refuge from such situations on the coast. And utilizing the Salish Sea as another ecosystem that's got less of those issues.
So, to summarize, the question was, do I know of any studies that are looking at the effects of climate change on the transients, specifically their use of the area, and also it seems like if the outer coast waters are warming, or if there's toxic algae blooms out there, maybe that's why they're using inland waters. And I don't know of any studies looking into that, but that seems to make sense to me as well. If there are if the outer coast is warmer, or that, I think that the effect would be on the prey first. The effect of climate change, the toxic algae, and warmer waters that are going to affect the lower levels of the food chain first, but all of that will eventually lead to an effect on the transients as well. Any other questions? All right, well, I'll stick around through lunch if anybody does. Thanks.